Remember when the gentle, hypnotic plucking of a banjo echoing through the dense, fog-choked Appalachian mountains made your blood run completely cold? In 1972, Deliverance didn't just redefine the survival thriller genre. It took the concept of a peaceful nature retreat, stripped it of all its romanticized beauty, and dragged audiences kicking and screaming through a relentless gauntlet of pure, unadulterated terror. We all know the infamous squeal. We all remember the sheer, paralyzing panic etched into the faces of four city men who suddenly realized they were completely cut off from civilization. But what most viewers never realized is that the fear you saw on screen wasn't acting. Behind the camera, this production was a lawless, uninsurable death trap. Director John Boorman didn't just take his cast into the wilderness. He stripped away their stunt doubles, threw away the safety manuals, and essentially forced them to fight for their actual lives in the raging, freezing currents of the Chattooga River. This wasn't a movie shoot. It was a legitimate hostage situation masked as a Hollywood production. Welcome to Silver Screen Files. Today, we are peeling back the curtain on a film set so chaotic, so steeped in reckless ego and literal physical trauma that it's a miracle anyone survived to attend the premiere. We are counting down 15 bizarre, terrifying, and utterly mind-blowing behind-the-scenes facts about the making of Deliverance. From a genuinely brutal fistfight between the author and the director, to leading men suffering shattered bones and near drownings. And make sure you stay until the very end, because our number one fact reveals the truly devastating, real-world body count that this movie accidentally left in its wake. A dark legacy that still haunts that very river today. If you love diving deep into the messy, dangerous, and unforgettable history of classic cinema, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss our next descent into Hollywood madness. Now, grab your life jacket, hold on tight, and let's paddle into the darkness. Number 15. The budget that demanded blood. The budget that demanded actual blood. The studio had a very different plan at first for this harrowing journey. When Warner Brothers initially greenlit the adaptation of James Dickey's best-selling novel, they envisioned a massive, star-studded Hollywood spectacle. They wanted the absolute biggest names of the era. We are talking about cinematic titans like Marlon Brando and Jack Nicholson paddling down that river. Can you imagine The Godfather and Johnny Torrance trying to navigate a canoe through treacherous rapids? It sounds like a guaranteed box office explosion. But there was one massive, insurmountable problem looming over the studio executives: the price tag. Brando and Nicholson commanded astronomical salaries that would have instantly bloated the budget beyond repair. Furthermore, megastars of that caliber come with ironclad contracts, massive entourages, and strict insurance policies that specifically prohibit them from doing anything remotely dangerous. Faced with a slashed budget, director John Boorman made a fateful, ruthless decision. He completely pivoted his casting strategy. Instead of expensive, pampered A-listers, he actively sought out actors who were hungry, relatively affordable, and most importantly, desperate enough to say yes to absolute insanity. He needed men who could not afford to refuse doing their own life-threatening stunts. Enter Burt Reynolds, a television actor desperately trying to break into serious film. Enter Jon Voight, who was looking to prove his rugged versatility. These men weren't just hired to act out a script. They were hired because the production simply could not afford to hire professional, trained stuntmen to take the brutal hits for them. Every time you see those men being hurled against jagged rocks, swallowed by churning white water, and shivering in the bone-chilling Appalachian winds, you are watching the direct result of Hollywood penny pinching. Because apparently, the budget was held together with tape, hope, and the unspoken agreement that human lives were cheaper than special visual effects. Which brings us to a detail most fans completely missed, involving the movie's most iconic and deeply unsettling musical moment. Number 14. The Banjo Boys' Bizarre Secret. The Banjo Boys' Secret Third Arm. Remember when the haunting, hyperspeed melody of Dueling Banjos became an instant cultural phenomenon? The scene is legendary. The slick, confident city boy with his acoustic guitar, trying to communicate through music with a strange, silent, and deeply intimidating local teenager perched on a decrepit wooden porch. Billy Redden, the local boy cast to play the banjo prodigy, had a face that perfectly captured the isolated, eerie atmosphere Boorman was desperately trying to cultivate. There was just one tiny, frustrating detail that threatened to ruin the entire sequence. Billy Redden did not know how to play a single chord on the banjo. He couldn't even fake the complex, lightning-fast finger-picking required to make the intense musical duel believable. Boorman was panicking. The entire emotional hinge of the movie's opening relied on this scene looking completely authentic and effortlessly brilliant. So, in a stroke of absolute bizarre ingenuity, the production resorted to an incredibly strange practical illusion. They found a local, highly skilled musician who knew the piece inside and out. They then had Billy Redden put on a specially modified, oversized shirt. The actual musician crouched completely hidden out of frame, awkwardly reaching his own arms through the sleeves of Billy's shirt. When you watch that scene, the dead-eyed, chilling stare belongs to Billy Redden. But the hands frantically attacking those banjo strings? Those belong to a completely different man, awkwardly hugging a teenager from behind, while hiding from the camera lens. It is an incredibly bizarre, almost comical image when you picture it happening on set. Yet, on screen, it translates into pure, unadulterated nightmare fuel that permanently etched itself into pop culture history. In Hollywood, a simple solution often means making things dramatically more complicated and incredibly weird. But if faking a musical performance sounds a little messy, the next fact proves that some of the actors were thrown into genuine, terrifying danger with absolutely zero preparation. Number 13. The leading man's deadly first time. The double virgin of the Chattooga River. For Ned Beatty, this was not just another role in a long, illustrious career. In fact, prior to stepping onto the muddy, chaotic set of Deliverance, Ned Beatty had never acted in a single motion picture. He was a highly respected stage actor, accustomed to the controlled, safe environment of a theatrical stage, the predictable lighting, and the comfort of rehearsing in a warm, dry room. Boorman cast him as Bobby Tripp, the deeply unfortunate, soft-bellied insurance salesman who suffers the film's most infamous and traumatizing ordeal. But the physical trauma for Beatty started long before that specific dark scene was ever filmed. Beatty was an absolute novice when it came to the brutal reality of the wilderness. He had never spent significant time surviving in the deep woods. More importantly, as the script demanded him to navigate treacherous, deadly rapids, the terrifying truth emerged. Ned Beatty had never been in a canoe in his entire life, not once. He was a complete, utter novice to the water. And Boorman's solution to this glaring lack of experience, he essentially shrugged, put a wooden paddle in Beatty's trembling hands, and shoved him out into the freezing, violent currents of a river known to locals for its deadly, unpredictable undertows. There was no extensive training camp. There was no gentle introduction to water safety protocols. Beatty was thrust directly into the deep end, both metaphorically and literally. The sheer, wide-eyed panic you see on Bobby's face as the canoe begins to violently pitch and spin out of control, that is the authentic, unvarnished terror of a man who suddenly realizes he is trapped in a flimsy piece of wood, at the absolute mercy of a river that wants to drown him, surrounded by a camera crew that absolutely refuses to stop rolling. It is the kind of reckless casting decision that would result in massive, multi-million-dollar lawsuits today. But in the Wild West of 1970s filmmaking, it was just considered a highly effective way to capture genuine emotion. And speaking of capturing genuine emotion at any cost, our next fact reveals just how morbid the director's overarching strategy really was. Number 12. Scheduling for a funeral. Shooting in the shadow of absolute death. Behind the camera, this production wasn't just physically dangerous, it was psychologically twisted by the man sitting in the director's chair. John Boorman was completely obsessed with authenticity. He wanted the degradation, the exhaustion, and the creeping despair of the characters to feel completely earned and incredibly visceral. To achieve this, he made a massive, logistically nightmarish demand of his production team. He insisted that the entire film must be shot in strict, unwavering chronological order. Now, in the modern film industry, shooting in sequence is incredibly rare and horribly expensive. It means constantly moving heavy equipment up and down treacherous riverbanks, battling the weather daily, rather than shooting all scenes at one location at the same time to save money. When the studio executives pushed back against this costly, inefficient scheduling, Boorman revealed his true, chilling reasoning. He wasn't just doing it for the actors' emotional continuity. He genuinely believed that the stunts were so dangerous and the river so incredibly volatile that there was a very high probability one of his 4 leading actors was going to die before filming wrapped. Let that sink in for a heavy moment. The director of a major Hollywood studio film actively planned the shooting schedule around the anticipated fatal accident of his own cast members. Boorman cold-bloodedly reasoned that if Burt Reynolds or Jon Voight drowned halfway through the agonizing shoot, at least he would have all their prior scenes already in the can. He could simply rewrite the script on the fly, have their character tragically die in the river earlier than expected, and finish the movie with the surviving actors. The cast was well aware of this morbid, terrifying backup plan. It hung over the set like a thick, suffocating fog of impending doom. Every time they stepped into those fragile canoes, they knew their director had already calculated the exact mathematical odds of their demise and factored it into the daily call sheet, which is a polite way of saying everyone on set was basically waiting for a terrible tragedy to happen at any given second. But if you think the director was the only one making disturbing choices, wait until you hear how network television accidentally created the movie's most traumatizing moment. Number 11. The TV censor's sickest accident. The TV-friendly nightmare. Remember when the line, "squeal like a pig," echoed through the dense, unforgiving woods, cementing itself as one of the most horrifying pieces of dialogue in cinematic history? For audiences sitting in darkened theaters, that specific phrase felt like a masterclass in psychological degradation. It was raw, it was humiliating, and it sounded exactly like something a deeply disturbed predator would say to completely break his victim's spirit. But what most viewers never realized is that this iconic line was never supposed to be in the movie. In James Dickey's original script, the dialogue during that harrowing assault sequence was significantly more profane, graphic, and direct. When the studio executives reviewed the footage, they immediately panicked. They realized that if they ever wanted to sell the broadcasting rights to network television in the future, the original profanity would be completely unairable. They needed a clean, heavily sanitized version of the scene for the censors. So, the crew was forced to brainstorm a quick, family-friendly overdub that didn't use any explicit curse words. Someone on set randomly suggested having the mountain man demand his victim to squeal like a pig. It was meant to be a safe, watered-down compromise, but ironically, stripping away the standard profanity and replacing it with bizarre, animalistic humiliation made the scene infinitely more terrifying. The sheer psychological horror of that improvised line elevated a brutal scene into an unforgettable cinematic trauma. Television executives, somehow both terrified of risk and completely addicted to accidentally creating pure nightmare fuel. And while that was happening in the editing room, behind the scenes on the river told a very different story about physical boundaries. Number 10. The unfaked corpse, the dislocated corpse. There is a deeply unsettling moment later in the film when the surviving men finally locate Drew's lifeless body, wedged among the jagged, slippery rocks. The cold, gray water washes over his pale skin, and his arm is twisted behind his head at a completely unnatural, horrifying angle. It is the kind of grotesque visual detail that perfectly sells the brutal reality of a drowning victim being battered by violent currents. Fans often assume this happened because the special effects department spent hours crafting a highly realistic, expensive prosthetic dummy. But the truth was vastly stranger and a lot more uncomfortable for the cast and crew to witness. No dummy was ever used for that shot. Actor Ronnie Cox, who played Drew, possessed a highly unusual physical trait. He was extremely double-jointed in his shoulders. When it came time to film the gruesome discovery, Cox simply lay back in the freezing, bone-chilling water, looked at the director, and casually popped his own shoulder entirely out of its socket. The loud, sickening pop echoed over the rushing water, instantly turning the stomachs of the camera crew standing nearby. He held that agonizing, dislocated pose while the freezing river washed over his face, completely blurring the line between acting and actual physical torment. In Hollywood, a simple solution often means making things dramatically more complicated, and deeply disturbing to look at. Because apparently, the production looked at that kind of physical danger and thought, yes, let's make it worse. Number 9. The $1 million insurance lie. No insurance, no problem. Behind the camera, this production was much messier than it looked, especially when it came to legalities. When you were shooting a major motion picture involving violent rapids, jagged cliffs, and actors wielding real weapons, the studio mandates a mountain of insurance paperwork. Insurance companies send out risk assessors to carefully monitor every single stunt, ensuring that $1 million movie stars are never placed in genuine life-threatening jeopardy. But director John Boorman knew perfectly well that his entire artistic vision relied on throwing his actors into actual uncontrolled danger. If the insurance agent saw the sheer madness of his daily shooting schedule, they would have shut the entire movie down in a matter of hours. So Boorman made a completely reckless, highly illegal decision. He lied. He systematically forged the daily production reports. He told the studio executives and the insurance companies that the actors were safely standing on dry riverbanks, while highly trained stuntmen were the ones navigating the deadly white water. In reality, Burt Reynolds and Jon Voight were out there being swallowed by violent whirlpools and smashed against unforgiving rocks. If any of those actors had drowned or broken their necks, Boorman wouldn't have just lost his movie. He would have faced catastrophic, career-ending lawsuits and potential criminal charges for gross negligence. Because nothing says smart planning like fixing a problem by creating 3 new illegal ones. And sometimes, the most memorable moments happen because something went catastrophically wrong. Number 8. The crash wasn't acting. The canoe was actually destroyed. During one of the most chaotic and high-stakes sequences, the men lose total control of their wooden canoe. The fragile vessel is violently hurled downstream, finally crashing with a sickening, definitive crunch as it snaps completely in half against the unforgiving boulders. Audiences watched in horror as the characters were plunged into the icy depths, their only means of escape shattered into useless splinters. You might think the art department meticulously pre-scored the wood, creating a breakaway prop designed to safely shatter on impact. But the real trouble started when the river decided to take over the directing duties. That was not a breakaway prop. It was a completely authentic, solid wooden canoe, and the crash was a genuine, terrifying accident. The sheer, uncontrollable force of the Chattooga River caught the boat at the absolute worst possible angle, violently wrapping it around a massive stone. The actors were genuinely thrown into the chaotic white water, struggling to keep their heads above the freezing surface as heavy, jagged pieces of wood rained down around them. Instead of yelling "cut" and rushing to help his drowning cast, Boorman simply ordered the camera operators to keep rolling, capturing their authentic, desperate panic. And yes, someone got paid to make that ruthless decision. Hey, quick pause before we dive into the truly unhinged second half of this countdown. Could you ever imagine yourself willingly stepping into a flimsy wooden canoe to navigate the treacherous, deadly currents of the Chattooga River? Or would you take one look at those dark, imposing woods and immediately drive back to the city? Let me know your survival strategy in the comments down below. And if you are enjoying this deep dive into cinematic chaos, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Silver Screen Files. It really helps us keep unearthing these wild Hollywood histories. Now, let's get back to the madness, because the drama off-screen was about to get incredibly violent. Number 7. A literal fistfight on set. The author's knockout punch. Not everyone on set agreed with Boorman's relentless, grueling vision for the movie. James Dickey was not just the screenwriter, he was the original author of the best-selling novel, a massive, imposing man with a towering ego and a severe, well-documented problem with alcohol. Dickey envisioned a very specific, fiercely poetic translation of his life's work. But as filming progressed, he watched in drunken, simmering fury as Boorman ruthlessly cut his precious dialogue, altered character motivations, and transformed his literary masterpiece into a raw, breathless action thriller. The tension on the muddy, mosquito-infested riverbank grew thicker and more suffocating every single day. Dickey would show up to the set heavily intoxicated, loudly interrupting takes and aggressively berating the actors for not delivering his lines with enough southern gravitas. The breaking point finally arrived during a heated argument over the creative direction of the ending. Words turned into violent shoving, and before the crew could even react, the towering author and the stubborn director engaged in a brutal, legitimate fistfight right there in the dirt. According to multiple eyewitness accounts from the horrified crew, Dickey threw a devastating punch that connected squarely with Boorman's face, allegedly shattering the director's front teeth. The situation became so intensely toxic and dangerous that Boorman had no choice but to forcefully ban the author from his own movie set, which is a polite way of saying everyone on set probably needed a restraining order and a very long nap. But if that sounds like pure madness, the next fact proves the actors were willing to endure literal torture for the perfect shot. Number 6. The underwater hostage. The hand of drowning. Let's talk about the deeply traumatizing final image of the film. Jon Voight's character awakes in a cold sweat, staring out at the calm, mirror-like surface of the lake. Suddenly, a pale, lifeless hand bursts from the dark water, frozen in a desperate, rigor mortis grip. It is a haunting, symbolic reminder that the river will never truly let them go. For decades, viewers naturally assumed that this macabre visual was achieved using a simple rubber prop attached to a hidden underwater wire. But looking back now, this fact changes how the whole movie feels. Boorman, in his endless, terrifying quest for absolute realism, refused to use a fake hand. He insisted that a rubber prop wouldn't interact with the water's surface tension correctly, and it wouldn't possess the subtle, terrifying weight of real human flesh. So he ordered a living, breathing extra to dive into the freezing, murky depths of the lake. This poor, unnamed crew member was forced to hold on to heavy weights at the bottom, completely submerged in the freezing darkness. He was given nothing but a thin, flimsy plastic tube to breathe through. When Boorman yelled action, the extra had to blindly thrust his arm upward, breaking the surface in a perfect, rigid pose. He had to remain completely motionless underwater, holding his breath and enduring the freezing temperatures, just to capture 3 seconds of pure cinematic dread. It was a level of extreme, unnecessary dedication that perfectly summarized the entire chaotic production. And while the extras were suffering underwater, the main cast was dealing with a completely different kind of terror on dry land. Number 5. Method acting taken too far. The mountain men's method madness. The terrifying impact of the film's primary antagonists heavily relied on them feeling like genuine, unpredictable predators of the deep woods. Bill McKinney and Herbert Coward, the actors cast to play these nightmarish mountain men, took their responsibilities incredibly seriously, perhaps a little too seriously for the comfort of everyone else involved. To maintain the thick, suffocating tension required for their brutal scenes, McKinney decided to employ an extreme version of method acting. He absolutely refused to break character, even when the cameras stopped rolling. He wouldn't socialize with the main cast at the hotel. He would sit in the shadows on set, glaring at Burt Reynolds and Ned Beatty with the exact same predatory, hollow stare he used during the actual takes. He intentionally made the atmosphere as uncomfortable and threatening as humanly possible. Burt Reynolds, a notoriously tough and confident Hollywood star, later admitted in interviews that McKinney genuinely terrified him. When the men who were supposed to be brutally hunting you on screen start acting like they want to hunt you during lunch break, the line between acting and reality completely dissolves, which is exactly the kind of psychological warfare director John Boorman actively encouraged. But if mental warfare wasn't enough, the physical challenges were about to reach a lethal peak. Number 4. One slip from certain death. Jon Voight's death-defying climb. Near the climax of the film, Jon Voight's character, Ed, is forced to scale a massive, sheer rock cliff face rising vertically out of the rushing river. It is a grueling, exhausting sequence that perfectly captures the agonizing desperation of a man pushed far beyond his physical limits. In any normal Hollywood production, this scene would be shot on a carefully constructed soundstage with padded floors, hidden safety harnesses, and professional rock climbers acting as stunt doubles. But as we have thoroughly established by now, there was absolutely nothing normal about the making of Deliverance. John Boorman simply pointed to a massive, jagged, completely vertical cliff face over the actual Chattooga River and told Jon Voight to start climbing. There were no safety cables attached to his waist. There was no hidden safety net waiting to catch him if his fingers slipped on the wet stone. If Voight had lost his grip on that treacherous, moss-covered rock, he would have plummeted directly onto the deadly, unforgiving boulders below. The agonizing, trembling muscle spasms you see in his arms during that climb were not the result of brilliant acting. They were the genuine, terrifying physical reactions of a man who knew that a single wrong move meant absolute, immediate death. And the danger wasn't just in the air. The water below was actively trying to claim lives. Number 3. Trapped under the raging river. Ned Beatty's whirlpool trap. Despite his complete lack of experience in the wilderness, Ned Beatty managed to survive the grueling first half of the shoot. But the river was not done testing him. During one particularly chaotic sequence involving the overturned canoe, Beatty was violently thrown into a section of the river known for its incredibly dangerous undertows. Before anyone could react, Beatty was caught in a massive, swirling whirlpool. The sheer force of the rotating water sucked him completely underneath the surface, dragging him deep into the freezing, dark depths. He was entirely trapped underwater, completely out of sight of the panicked camera crew standing helplessly on the riverbank. Seconds ticked by like agonizing hours as everyone stared at the churning water, genuinely believing they had just watched a man drown. In a terrifying struggle for survival, Beatty fought against the immense water pressure and miraculously managed to pop back up to the surface further downstream, gasping for air. He had cheated death by mere seconds, and instead of shutting the production down, the director probably just checked to see if they got it on film. But while Beatty's brush with death was an accident, our next star actively volunteered for his permanent physical trauma. Number 2. The stunt that shattered a spine. Burt Reynolds' shattered spine. Burt Reynolds built his entire career on being the ultimate, fearless tough guy. So when it came time to film the dramatic sequence where the canoe plunges over a massive, violently churning waterfall, he stubbornly refused to let a dummy or a stuntman take the fall. He wanted to look heroic, completely underestimating the sheer, crushing power of the roaring water. Reynolds plunged over the steep drop and was instantly swallowed by a massive, aggressive hydraulic jump at the bottom of the falls. The violent, churning water slammed his body against a submerged rock, severely cracking his tailbone and leaving him temporarily paralyzed in excruciating pain. He was trapped in the swirling vortex, nearly drowning before finally being violently spat out downstream, his clothes completely torn to shreds. When a bruised, battered, and utterly exhausted Reynolds finally limped back to the camera crew, he asked John Boorman how the daring stunt looked on film. Boorman simply looked at him and coldly replied that it looked exactly like a dummy falling over a waterfall. Reynolds had shattered his spine and nearly drowned, all for a shot that the director didn't even think looked impressive. It is the ultimate, tragic irony of a production entirely fueled by reckless ego. Which brings us to our final, most devastating fact. A fact that proves the horror of Deliverance didn't stop when the projector was turned off. Number 1. The river's real-world body count. The river's real body count. When Deliverance hit theaters in 1972, it became a massive, unprecedented cultural phenomenon. But despite its horrifying depiction of the backwoods, the breathtaking cinematography of the untamed wilderness had an incredibly unexpected, dark side effect. It sparked a massive boom in the outdoor recreation industry. Thousands of adventurous tourists, completely captivated by the rugged beauty of the film, flocked to the Chattooga River to recreate the epic journey for themselves. The problem was, just like the characters in the movie, these tourists were arrogant, entirely untrained city dwellers with absolutely no understanding of how deadly those whitewater rapids truly were. They bought cheap, flimsy canoes, ignored the warnings of the terrified locals, and blindly launched themselves into the exact same violent currents that had nearly killed Burt Reynolds and Ned Beatty. The consequences were absolutely catastrophic. In the years immediately following the film's release, over 30 people drowned in the Chattooga River, attempting to replicate the adventure of Deliverance. The river claimed more lives than any horror movie villain ever could, transforming a Hollywood masterpiece into a legitimate, real-world graveyard. It is a chilling, tragic legacy that permanently stains the history of the film, a haunting reminder that while cinema can offer a thrilling escape, nature itself does not care about your survival. And that is the true, unrelenting horror of Deliverance, a movie that nominated its cast for greatness, but left behind broken bones, lasting trauma, and a real-world body count that the studio would prefer you forget. Have you ever visited a famous movie location that turned out to be genuinely dangerous? Let me know your stories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark waters of cinema history, please give this video a like and share it with a fellow movie buff. Until next time, keep rewinding the memories, because you never know what dark secrets are hiding just below the surface. Thanks for watching Silver Screen Files.